Welcome home. It's Irish Family History with curious news and notes, celebrating our 4th year of this podcast at the Irish Roots Cafe, where every day's a holiday and there's always room for one more. One of 6 broadcast series from the head school at irishroots.com. I'm Mike OLaughlin, your host, publisher of rare Irish books and information on every county in Ireland since 1978. Be sure to read our blog, complete with links to click on from this podcast, and search our master index and books for free. Molly, wet the tea, Katie, bar the door, Sweeney, clear that floor, and bring out the Irish dancers. It's time we get this show on the road. Well, today, like I was telling everybody, we've got a special guest, and that guest is Bill Sweeney. And, I'm going to have to ask him, Big John Sweeney's the doorman here at the cafe, and he's always been searching his roots. I don't know if he's found them or not. He always thought he was related to the MacSweeneys in the north of Ireland, known as MacSweeney of the Battle Axe. And we'll have to ask Bill if he's related to our doorman there. That could be interesting. But Bill's actually done some research, and successfully, in Leitrim, Sligo, and Roscommon. So that's going to be interesting to hear somebody who's actually succeeded in real-life research. And he was looking for the Sweeneys and the Horans and the Brennans. And we're going to ask him just everything we can. We're going to ask him about place names and town lands, and when he took his trip over and made a lot of great discoveries, just what he found and what stuck with him the longest. And if we have time, we'll even talk to him about dual citizenship, which he knows just a little bit about. Bill, how are you today?
Fine, Mike. Thanks for inviting me here today. I had what I'd call a trip on our family history tour that exceeded all our expectations.
Boy, that's good to hear.
Yeah, went with a brother, and my sister and I all went in May.
Right, and where did you go first?
Well, they had never been to Ireland. This was my 3rd trip, and we decided, we plotted out a route that would give them a little time in Dublin, and then we rented a car, and we were going to spend a day in the townland where the Sweeneys are from, a day in the townland where the Horans are from, and then just drive by the Brennan's townland on the way back to Dublin. As it turns out, we discovered more in each townland than we thought we would.
Well, that's the same thing that happened to me about 30 years ago, and changed my life ever since. It's an amazing thing. Well, what about the Sweeneys? How did that go about?
Well, in each of these is it's a small world, funny connection that you could never count on, that opened the door for each one of these lines in Ireland. So my grandfather, my father's father, came over around 1905, as did his mother, and we knew roughly where they were from, but since my father is gone, my mother is gone, the grandparents are all gone, there's no one to ask these questions for. So by the time you wake up one day curious about it, there's no one to ask.
Yes.
So my parents had done some family research, and I took all their documentation, and I started working on it. And I happened to mention to a cousin of mine, Jim Murphy, that I was going to Ireland, and he said, "Oh, I know the family that bought the Sweeney cottage, the property." Mm-hmm. And the way he found out was that a lot of Irish people immigrated to Providence, Rhode Island, in my grandfather's day, and they all married and to other Irish people, and all my cousins are the Murphys and the Muldowneys and you name it. So he's up in Rochester, and he happened to be talking to a coworker, Mike Gillerlane, and they started saying, "Oh, you're from Providence? I'm from Providence. Oh, was your family from Ireland? Yeah. What's your mother's name?" "Well, it's Sweeney." And he says, "Gee, my family bought a cottage from the Sweeneys, and where are you from?" And they said, "Oh, in Leitrim." "Oh, where in Leitrim?" "Oh, a tiny little townland outside of Ballynamore." "Oh, yeah, what is it?" "Gubnavay." And he says, "That's it." And so there they are in Rochester, New York, having a conversation about their Irish heritage, and they find out that his family bought my cousin's, my family's property. And then he linked me up with the current owner, Michael Mulhan, and we actually visited him in August, and then that was with my wife and some friends. And we went back again with my brother and sister in May.
See, now, how many spellings of that Sweeney name have you found in the records?
Well, both with Brennan and with Sweeney, I was initially frustrated with my search in that I found records with Sweeney just NY and then Sweeney with EY.
Right.
And I struggled over, do I have the right person? Is my father's research correct? Am I down the wrong path? Well, when you find out that you actually meet someone who bought the property of your family, you start to realize I'm on the right track.
Yes.
And when I talked to the owner of the property and I said, that kind of bothers me, he said, look, every Irish person's name can be spelled multiple ways. He goes, don't give it a second thought. And the same thing happened to me with the Brennans, whether it's A-N or E-N.
Right.
And you just have to get past that. But I think all three of these I have nailed down now with certainty, the roots in Ireland.
Now, how about the people that you met on the way? Did you see any difference between the counties when you were traveling? Did they have a different feel to them?
Well, all three counties were, they're adjacent. So we went right from Leitrim to Sligo, about an hour away, and then about another hour over to Roscommon. All very rural areas. When we visited people, they're all little farms, or they would have a cow and some sheep. They all had sheds in the back with piles of turf. They all had bog rights. Every kitchen or dining room we went into, wherever the stove was to heat the house, had a bucket of turf sitting right there next to us when we were talking. So it was kind of a throwback for me.
Yes.
Very similar in that regard. All very rural. The three townlands where my family's from.
Now, did all these immigrants, did they all come to the same place when they came to America, or did they come to different ports?
Well, they all settled in Providence, but some went to Boston, I guess, and others to Ellis Island. So my grandfather, I have the passenger ship where he arrived, and the manifest for his arrival in Ellis Island. My grandmother arrived in Boston. Most settled in Providence. Some went to Boston from there. But yes, that's almost all of my family originated in Providence in this country.
Now, were there any other special times, special sources in your research that helped you to find any of the three families?
Well, there was a piece of gold I found out with the Brennans. And my grandfather, Charles Brennan, he created a family tree back in the 1940s and unfortunately died fairly young in 1947. And before my mother she was only 20 or so at the time, and they never talked about family research. But she took ownership of this chart, which is now over 60 years old, and it's in wonderful shape. And it was the family tree that he put together of the U.S. line and the Irish line in quite a detailed tree. And when I did my research, you can put things in the computer, and when you send somebody a computer file, it has no credibility because you could be putting anyone in there.
Yes.
And when we went, I managed to unlock the key to the Brennan's townland just before we went on this trip. So I knew where we were going with the Sweeneys. I knew where we were going with the Horans. And I was, as I said before, I was thinking about the Brennans as a drive-by.
Yes.
Oh, we'll drive by the cemetery. Well, we found out it was Caranamata in Roscommon. And again, if you know the townland, you know everything.
Yes.
We pull into the townland, and we stop and ask someone, do you know where Old St. John Cemetery is? And he says, yes, who are you looking for? And I said, the Brennans. He said, they still live here. They live right down the road. It's a house second from the end. And so we said, well, okay, maybe we'll go knock on that door. We went to the cemetery. Two people from the local historical society started talking to us. They're interested in the Brennan connection. They call, one of them calls, her 86-year-old father comes down to the cemetery, chats with us. He says, Vincent Brennan lives in the house. You see it right up there. And the two other brothers, Mick and Eamon, live over down the road. So he said, go knock on their door. So we went and knocked on their door. They invited us in. I said, it's unannounced. Hey, I think I'm your cousin, right?
Yes.
And we sit down in there and we start talking, and he brings out a book. It was a master's thesis written by Diane Dunnigan about Irish Emigration and Permanent Return.
Oh, yeah.
So it was the uniqueness of, rather than the many stories of Irish immigrants who never came back, this came back to live, and it was done on one of my relatives, Margaret Brennan.
Boy, that's a great resource.
And he hands me the book. He says, take a look at this. I open up the family tree, and it was the just about exact copy of the one my grandfather had created for the Irish line.
Yeah.
And in addition, it had information they didn't have because he had the spouse of what was their furthest back generation, and he had an additional generation. And when I contacted the author and we talked about it, she said, in general, when they put that together, people don't think a lot about the oral history gets lost beyond a grandparent, let's say. And you lose a generation as time passes. So I had that captured from my grandfather 60 years ago that they had lost in Ireland. And so when I pulled out this chart, I had instant credibility.
Oh,
they were like, wow, they were stunned. And I imagine I'm sitting there in this little house in this little townland in Ireland, and I open up that family tree, and I see it's my family tree. There's no doubt whatsoever.
How far back? What was the oldest date on that family tree?
The oldest one was probably from around 18, not a birth date, but I imagine 1790-ish would have been that one. And or maybe 1800, around there. And there is an old reference to a Luke Brennan in that area in 1749, but no one knows how to make that link. From my grandfather's tree, Martin Brennan, there's probably a missing generation or so between them. Nobody's, so I'm going to work on that link, but I don't know how I'll ever make it.
Well, now, what about the third one in Sligo, the Horans? What did you find there?
Yeah, and there's another incredible coincidence that unlocked that one. So when I made my trip in August, I wrote a blog about it. I have a blog, and I said what a wonderful people we met in Ballynamore and Ballynafad. And this person in Ballynafad, Sligo, is the neighboring village to where my grandmother was from, Ballyboy. Mm-hmm. And he searches, every week or so, he said he searches for mentions of Ballynafad, his village. And he found my blog entry. And he said, hey, Bill, so he tweeted me. So here we are, social networking, right? He reads my blog, he tweets me, and he says, hey, I wish I met you when you were here. The person you met in the cemetery that was named Horan, but not my relative, it was a groomsman in his wedding. He's from my grandmother's town, and his wife is from my grandfather's townland area. Oh, and he says, small world, right? So I email him and say, that would be great. I said, we're going back in May. And then he said, oh, great, I'll do some family research for you. So I sent him some basic information, and he talked to the old folks in town, and he found cousins. He found 3 of my cousins. He talked to them. He found the cottage where my grandmother grew up. And when we went over there, he said to me, look, I know you're busy. I can spend 5 minutes with you, or I can spend 3 hours with you. And I said, I'll take the 3 hours. And he brought us to the cottage, which is actually in the 60s, it was 1960s, it was bought by the Irish Forestry Service. And it's been used as a storage house. And it's actually up for sale by the Irish Forestry Service because they think it probably has some value and has a little bit of a view of a lake. And so it was amazing to meet the cousins, see the cottage. So we actually, on this trip, we saw the cottage my grandfather grew up in, the cottage my grandmother grew up in, and the cottage that the Brennans had lived in for generations, which was behind the little house we visited there.
Boy, there's going to be so many people that want to talk to you. How do they get to your blog? Is that the best way to get you?
Yeah, that's just at Sweeney.net, SWEENEY.net.
Good. I just know there's a lot of people that are going to want to tap into all this information you touched upon. Now you said that you took several different modes of transportation. My first question is, when you were driving a car, did you keep that rear view mirror, the side mirrors, or did they end up getting broken off in your travels?
Both the August trip and the May trip, we managed not to damage the car. But I tell you what, in August, we had a manual transmission, which I hadn't driven in many years, and it was so stressful. with the tight spaces and maneuvering, always having to worry about getting into gear and out.
Yes.
And in May, I had an automatic transmission, and all I had to worry about was, wide right, tight left, and the stress level of driving was so much lower.
Yes, I agree. I've done that, and it had been a while for me too. And even having to use your opposite hand to shift with was a little bit of a different thing.
Yeah, so we didn't drive in Dublin, but driving around the small roads, it's a little hair-raising when cars come at you at 55, 60 miles an hour on a narrow road, and there's no shoulder to your left, and the branches start flipping on the poor passenger on the side, but we managed to get through it.
Say, which month did you enjoy the travel in the most?
I think it was, I would say May. We hit less traffic in May than we did in August.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the weather was nice in both cases.
Oh, that's good to know. Now, you also, didn't you take some alternate forms of transportation?
Yeah, well, on our August trip, we obviously flew there. We took a bus trip. We took a boat to the Aran Islands. We took bicycles on the Aran Islands, and we took a train up to Belfast. So we covered all modes of transportation on that August trip.
How were the bicycles?
Oh, it was a lot of fun. That was the best way to see the Aran Islands. We spent several hours bicycling around.
And I understand bicycling is now big in Dublin because they're using it for traveling around the city center there, I guess.
Yeah, I've seen that, but I don't think I'm going to risk that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I had trouble negotiating things on foot. It's a crowded town, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and it's I think that my wife and the couple that was with us in August, the favorite part of their trip was the small town part that we spent looking at the first glance in the townlands of the Sweeneys and the Horans before we knew as much as we did.
I'd have to agree with that too. What was there anything that say you might have forgot about or forgot to prepare for when you ended up in Ireland on the trip? If you go back again, are you going to do something different?
I think I was really prepared in the May trip. But one thing that's amazing, even if you are not totally prepared, is that how helpful the people are in the small towns. I mean, there's not one person that didn't go out of their way for us. And quite often someone would say, when I'd ask about the Sweeneys in that townland or the Horans or whoever, they'd always say, let me call my dad. And invariable, they'd call their father to ask him a question, and he would, instead of just talking on the phone, run right over and have a nice conversation with you.
Boy, yes, that's the same way it was for me 30 years ago. What about the economy? Did you notice anything about the value of the dollar or the way things were in Ireland?
Well, we talked to our B&B hosts quite a bit about the economy and how things were going, and they were feeling the pinch, and they definitely were talking about how tough it was with the amount of building that got out of control and so the construction problems and all of that. But everyone seemed to be making it all right.
And did you stop at the places? I think Giant's Causeway, Blarney Castle, the Cliffs of Moher.
Yeah, we did all the typical touristy things on the August trip, and on the May trip, this was a very specific purpose. We were going to do that family history tour.
Yes.
And one other little small town thing, when we were looking the first time, trying to find the original Sweeney property, and we got directions from Michael Mohan how to get out to his house, and obviously I blew it. And we're out in the middle of nowhere, and people had said just knock on someone's house. And so we go knock on the door of drive in a driveway, knock on a door, and a woman comes to the door, and I said, do you know where Michael Mohan lives? She goes, oh, my name is Mohan, but I don't know where he lives, but my father knows. So go next door, go ask my father. So we drive next door and knock on his door. It's raining out. He says, oh, I know Michael, good friend. And he tells us how to get there, and he must have seen in my eyes that I wasn't going to do it. So we come back out to our car, and next thing you know, he's running out in the rain with his car keys, and he says, I'll drive you there.
I tell you, there's something in the air. There's something not just mystical, but there's some kind of just desserts. There's so many people that get treated so well when they go back home, you might say, that I think that it's extraordinary.
Yeah, so we just hit so many coincidences that helped us, the internet person that helped us with the Horans, the cousin just happened to be chatting to help us with the Sweeneys, the last minute, the fact that I was able to pinpoint Karen Amade as the townland, and then having that incredible family tree that connected there with an author who wrote a book. So it's hard to imagine anything going better on that May trip.
Well, looking at that place name Ballinafad, that could also be shortened to Ballyfad, especially by some Americans after they've been here a while and a generation start writing it down. And that was the name of a famous townland in the song Irish Need Not Apply. It started out, I am a decent Irishman, just come from Ballyfad. So you might have to, if you haven't heard that song, you might listen to it. I don't know.
Definitely, I'll check it out.
Maybe it was written about your ancestors when they were looking for a job when they first got to America.
I'm sure they saw that sign on more than one occasion.
Yeah, that's no doubt. How about, I understand on the Irish Fireside podcast, you talked a little bit about Irish citizenship. Now, there's a lot of people interested in that. Could you tell us, they want to know how to do it and how hard it is. What would you tell them?
Well, it was a lot of work. This is actually what really pushed me over the top to do this deeper level of family research back in Ireland. It's what really got me started. When I found out that you could, if your grandparent, at least one grandparent, it only takes one, is born in Ireland, and you can document that fact and produce 3 pieces of documentation, such as birth record in Ireland, and then a marriage record and a death record. And they don't have to have been married or died in Ireland, just that you're proving that that's the same person, that you can become an Irish citizen, and then you can get a European passport. So probably, go ahead.
And how far back does it have to be? What generation?
It can only be a grandparent.
Gotcha.
It can't be, believe me, for my children, I've tried every loophole to see, because if I had done this before my kids were born, they would automatically be citizens as well. Mm-hmm. But since I didn't do it until after they were born, there's nothing more for them, because you can't go back to the great-grandparent. Yes. So it essentially dies with me. Mm-hmm. And it's a long process. I would say it took me at least 18 months. You have to be patient. A lot of people would say, I'm not going to bother. It takes too long. But I'm always someone that says, start it up, and eventually, I plan on living a long time. So 18 months, 2 years didn't bother me.
Well, and did you actually talk on the phone a lot to people, or was it all by mail? How'd that work?
I did over the internet. I requested the formal birth certificate for my grandfather and my grandmother. And at the time, since I was worried about the Sweeney with the NY and the EY inconsistency, I thought I'll do both. Mm-hmm. So I gave them records, 3 records of my grandfather, 3 records of my grandmother, put it all in there, figuring overkill. So you didn't really have to talk on the phone. There's a website you can get official long form or short form birth certificates. There's a website.
Who did you use for that website? Do you remember?
It's in my blog, actually. If you look for the dual citizenship on my blog, I have all the websites and the how-to, my experience are in my blog.
Gotcha.
And so you can download the application. So you fill out the application. You have the 3 forms of identification. An interesting thing is you have to get it certified. And one of the people that you can have it certified from is the parish priest, mm-hmm. which is very interesting. I didn't have to go get it notarized. I just had to go to my parish priest, and he put his stamp on it, and he signed it, validating that was me, and all of my paperwork was original. And
this is the parish priest here in America?
Yes. So it just shows you on the form who they kind of feel are authority figures,
yes.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And then you submit it it goes to the consulate, and it takes literally, maybe they were saying 16 months or something. It took me close to that. And then you get registered in the foreign births record. So I'm now in the foreign births registry in the consulate in New York. And then I could start the passport process, which is just like the U.S. passport process. And 4 months later or something, I got my Irish passport, which has been wonderful because it allows you to travel in Europe and move from country to country and skirt long lines at airports like you wouldn't believe.
Oh, yeah.
You come into Heathrow with 200 people in line, And you look over at the EU line, and there's about 10 people in it.
Yeah, and you just see people walking right through a lot of times, just real quick.
And my spouse was able to accompany me in those lines because I don't think that would go over very big for me to say, hey, I'll meet you on the other side after you waiting on line for 3 hours.
You'd be taking yourself, you'd be putting yourself in danger, that's for sure. What's now that you've done all this and it's really quite a thing, it's going to be passed down to your children, the knowledge and all the history that you gathered there. What do you think's the most important thing out of the whole experience for you right now?
I just think it was incredibly meaningful to actually be on the property and see the cottages where my grandparents grew up. I mean, to me, that was the biggest thing because it's so tangible. And it brings everything, all the things you can do on the internet and all the family trees you can draw can't be replaced by standing there and meeting someone who knows your family or meeting a relative that's there. Getting to that point, I think, was the best.
I have to agree. There's a lot to be said about book learning and scholarly research, but there's nothing that can take the place of standing on the ground that your ancestors came from, and I felt that feeling myself.
Yeah. Well, one other little funny thing that I found out in my research is about the Sweeneys. There's a classic Irish poem about the madness of Sweeney, and there's back from maybe the 600s or something. And so I got the book over the internet and just read it. It's Sweeney Astray. It's all about the story of this king named Sweeney that went mad and traveled all over Ireland.
Do you think he was a direct ancestor?
Well, he could have been, and in fact, in Leitrim there, on the mountain where my family's property was, they actually had put together a local book called The Mountain Echoes. They referred to the people there as the mountain people. There's a little monument there to the people that came down from Ulster. I forget how you pronounce what they called them, and I was trying to figure out, are those the Sweeneys? Because people tell me that in the 1300s, the Sweeneys came from Scotland as mercenaries, essentially,
they were
down through northern.
Gallo
yes,
yes,
exactly, and then down through, and then eventually made it to, through Northern Ireland down to Southern Ireland, and so it's interesting. I don't know if so I was trying to pin the earliest point of reference for the Sweeneys there. And I ended up, when I was back in Dublin, I went to the deeds office and the valuation office and the registry office in trying to get as far back as I could go. And I found some very interesting information in the valuation office for the Horans, the Sweeneys, and the Brennans. Since I knew the townlands, I could see when properties exchanged hands, when they were leasing it from a landowner, when they owned it, how much rent did they pay, how much property, what was the parcel number, and I did that and in each year, like say back in 1860-something, if it changed from one generation to another, they would scratch out the name and put the new name up there. Or when they would subdivide a property, you'd see what the rent was. And, so I found some really good concrete information there. But I think my next step to that question is going to be to try to go back farther in time on those. But
there were three main branches of the McSweeneys, I think they said, settled up north there, and some of them came down all the way to Cork or Kerry and fought for some of the Irish, like McCarthy down there. Some of them helped with O'Donnell in the north, over in Donegal, and some of them were further to the east. That's really where I think the homeland was. But that would be interesting to find out which of those three, if you're one of those three. Have you done your DNA yet?
Yeah, I actually did DNA several years back, and then I did it with another project. But I have to understand that better, because the DNA all says, okay, great, here's the chromosome thing, and you come from that region of the world, but is there any DNA that pinpoints things and family connections better than that?
Well, as time goes on, they're able to pinpoint exactly where this particular marker came from, and then theoretically, as more and more people get tested, you might be able to get back further in time, and they'll find another marker that that varied on you, and you can go back further or see if you were related to the McSweeneys of the Battle Axes or the McSweeney Bond whichever tribe it was. I just think they're going to find out more and more.
Yeah, for now I found out only general information from the DNA I've submitted, but I definitely want to do that. Anything I can do because it's so hard to pinpoint the right connection when you get back that far.
Mm-hmm. Well, now see if those people in that village, of course you probably already know it, but in the townlands you went back to, if they had their DNA taken, you could tell if they were direct relations or not, if you didn't already know. You could tell if they were from the same line at least.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. I'm pretty sure none of them did their DNA.
I know. Most people are reluctant to do it, but it's coming along now. And if you wanted to find if you were related to some of the Sweeneys in America, now maybe you don't want to find that out. I don't know. It's hard telling. But that's another line. If you could have a large Sweeney reunion and people could say, well, I'm from this McSweeney, and, of course, he was the best. And then you might get into some real rivalries. But now John Sweeney here that guards the door, I don't know if he's from your line or not.
I don't know, but the connection I mentioned on the Internet for the Horans, Jerry Clark, the first time we exchanged email, he said, look, I'll ask and see if they're willing to meet you, but if I can tell them you're single and in poor health, I'm sure they'll be happy, and wealthy, I'm sure they'll be happy to meet you. And I said, sorry, no on all three.
Well, good. That's good. That's going to keep a lot of those people just wanting wealth and fortune from coming to the blog now.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to add? This has sure been good, and it's always nice to talk to somebody who's been there and done it successfully. Is there anything else you want to add about the trip or about being Irish or about your section of the country? What's going on?
Well, I don't know. I guess I would just say to people that are trying to trace their roots to not get discouraged, because what happens is you find one piece of information and that unlocks the next 6 pieces of information. And it can be a passenger manifest, which tells you the townland they're from, and then the townland tells you so much, so that it's just, I think I'm at the point where I need that next breakthrough nugget of information, right? I've done everything I can with mine, but I know I'll find it. And when I find it, it'll unlock the next 6 things.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's all kinds of resources out there. You just have to start jumping into them. And it may not be easy, but it's sure getting easier every day. Well, I think that takes care of it today. We've just got talking to a fine and decent Irishman just come from Ballynafad, as they say in the songs. And we'll keep in touch. And I'm going to be checking out that blog, too. I might need to learn some new information. It's always good to keep in touch. And I'm sure a lot of our folks will go listen to you, too. That always happens. And until next time, Bill, we'll be talking to you later.
Okay, thank you.
That's all for today, folks. Joseph, warm up those pipes. Remember, we have a broadcast series on Irish song and recitation, on local history of the Irish in America, and on 2,000 years of Irish history, as well as on the counties, and something special coming up on Irish language, I hope. We've got all that and more at our head school at irishroots.com. And we've been known to appear, exhibit, teach, and even sing for your special events. Be sure to book in advance if it's important, and write me at my American address at Irish Roots Cafe, Box 7575, Kansas City, Missouri, 64116. Leave a message by phone at 816-256-3360. Reach me on my webpage at irishroots.com. Skype me at the Irish Roots Cafe. Get me on MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, and Irish Central. Members foot the bill so they get first priority, but we're open to all. And by the way, a big thank you to all of our members. And away.